Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are going to attempt to break your brain a little bit.
Just a little.
We are tackling a topic that literally challenges the ground you walk on and the clock hanging on your wall.
Right.
We're diving into the idea that time and space are not these rigid, fixed cages we're stuck in, but variables, things that can be manipulated, stretched, and, if you believe our source material, transcended entirely.
It is definitely a departure from our usual topics. We're looking at a collection of writings by an author named Sui Feng, specifically two texts, The Road to Transcending Time and Space and Transcending Time and Space to Live in the Future.
Okay.
But I think before we even start unpacking the physics or the philosophy here, we need to address the very specific context these writings come from.
Because this isn't the physics textbook.
No.
Yeah.
And it's not a standard self-help guide either.
No, and there's a massive flashing warning label right at the front of this material, isn't there?
There is. And honestly, it's refreshing in its bluntness. Xu Feng explicitly states that these texts are intended only for individuals who have been living in a specific community for at least 2 years.
A community called the Life Zen Garden, or Second Home.
Exactly. And the author actually warns that for anyone else, outsiders like us and, well, you listening, we should treat this content as, and this is a quote, made up.
Made up. That is a pretty strong disclaimer for your own work.
Right. Usually authors want you to believe everything they're saying is the absolute truth.
But not here.
Here, the source warns that if you try to practice these techniques without that community foundation, you risk psychological imbalance. The text translates it as going into the fire and devil.
Wow. Okay, so just to be clear about our mission today, we are exploring these concepts strictly as a window into a unique worldview. We're observing the machinery of this philosophy, not recommending you try to build it in your garage.
We are anthropologists today.
Exactly. So let's get into it. The source starts with something we all take for granted. The 24-hour day. Most of us think of that as a hard law of nature. But Xu Feng says that's just a convention.
He calls it a measurement, not a law. The text argues that time is entirely dependent on motion.
On motion?
To prove this, he uses some interesting math regarding the rotation of the Earth. He sets up a thought experiment. If you move east, you're moving against the rotation, which shortens your day.
Okay.
But if you move west, you're chasing the sun, and that lengthens the day.
Right. But we all know about time zones. If I fly from New York to London, I lose time. If I fly to LA, I gain it. Is he just talking about jet lag?
He's taking the concept of jet lag and, well, pushing it to its absolute logical extreme. He calculates that if you move west at exactly 465 meters per second,
Which is what?
roughly the speed of the Earth's rotation at the equator,
Okay.
if you do that, the sun would never set for you.
So you're just keeping pace with the sun. It just hangs there in the sky.
Exactly. In that scenario, the concept of a day disappears entirely. Your day becomes infinite. Or rather, time as a measure of days just vanishes. You've stepped out of the conventional cycle.
That is a cool image, just racing the sunset and winning. And I assume he escalates this, because 465 meters per second is fast, but it's not that fast in the grand scheme of things.
He does escalate it. He brings in the speed of light, 300,000 kilometers per second. He argues that if you hit that speed, time vanishes completely.
Which is classic theory of relativity.
Right, but he's applying it to this philosophy of escaping constraints. He's trying to show that time isn't a fixed container. It's a result of how fast you're moving relative to your environment.
Okay, so speed is one variable, but he also talks about position, right? This was the part of the text that I found conceptually easier to grasp, the analogy of the rotating circle.
Yes, this is key. Imagine a giant spinning disc, like a merry-go-round. If you're standing at the very edge, the periphery, you have to travel a massive distance just to complete one rotation.
You're running a marathon just to stay in the same place.
You're sprinting, wind in your hair, completely exhausted.
Right.
But if you stand at the center, you're barely moving. You just turn on your axis. The source argues that being closer to the center implies a smaller space and a much more relaxed existence.
While being on the edge implies a larger space and total exhaustion.
Precisely.
So the goal of this philosophy is to get to the center, to stop running the marathon. It really feels like a metaphor for how we live our lives.
It is. Are you on the edge, frantically trying to keep up with the spin of the world? Or are you at the center where things are calm?
And the text pivots here, right? It moves from this physical movement to biological movement.
Yes, and this is where we get into the claims about longevity and immortality.
This part is wild. So standard science tells us human cells divide a certain number of times, and then there's a hard stop.
Correct. It's called the Hayflick limit. The source actually cites this, noting that human cells divide about 50 times.
Okay.
And if each cycle takes about 2.4 years, that gives us a natural biological lifespan of around 120 years. That's our baseline.
So 120 years is the 24-hour day of biology. It feels like a law. But Zhu Feng argues that this 2.4-year cycle isn't fixed.
That's the core argument. He says that 2.4-year cycle is a variable, just like the length of a day is a variable.
Uh-huh.
He suggests that if you can change your speed, and we'll get to what that means, you can alter that cell division cycle.
How so?
If you stretch that cycle from 2.4 years to, say, 10 years, you aren't just living longer, you're theoretically approaching immortality.
But how? You can't just tell your cells to slow down. Does he offer any evidence that this cycle can actually change?
He uses environmental examples. He mentions his own time working in the Kilian Mountains at an altitude of 4,000 meters.
Right.
He observed that at high altitudes, plants had completely different growth cycles compared to sea level. The environment dictated the speed of life.
So he's saying environment equals speed.
Yes, but then he connects this to psychological time. He brings up the Chinese legend of Wu Zixu, whose hair turned white overnight due to extreme stress.
We've all heard stories like that. Or just the feeling that a really bad week feels like a year.
The longest day of my life.
Exactly. And it's usually not a happy one.
The source takes that feeling literally. It says harsh environments or high stress lengthen the perception of time, days like years, but that psychological stretching is actually damaging you. It's speeding up the biological clock.
And a good environment does the opposite.
Right. Superior environments shorten the perception. One day in heaven is a year on Earth. The claim is that mindset physically alters the biological clock.
So if I'm understanding this, stress and bad vibes make you run on the edge of that spinning circle. You're burning through your cell divisions faster.
That's the theory. He lists specific emotions that act as accelerants for aging. Anger, jealousy, fear. These are basically aging potions.
And what are the preservatives?
Peace, joy, and optimism. And the text specifically mentions telomeres, the protective caps on our DNA.
Which is real science. Telomeres do shorten as we age.
It is. Xu Feng identifies telomeres as the clock. His goal is to stop them from shortening. He believes that if you change your emotional and mental state, you can stop that clock.
This leads into his theory on input information,
Mm-hmm.
right? This is where the biology gets a little more esoteric. He talks about the hypothalamus.
He does. He claims the hypothalamus and pituitary gland are controlled by input information. He views information as a kind of nutrition.
Information as nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
I really like that concept. It implies you can get food poisoning from bad data.
That is exactly how he frames it. He says happy events act as rejuvenating information. Conversely, bad news, or sadness, is information that destroys the will and physically ages the gland.
It makes you think about what we doom scroll through every day. If news is food for your pituitary gland, most of us are eating a diet of pure junk food and poison.
It's a compelling argument for curating your inputs. And this leads to one of the most striking analogies in the text, atomic restructuring.
The chemistry analogy.
He says, look at chemistry. Oxygen plus copper equals copper oxide. Oxygen plus iron equals iron oxide. The element you combine with determines the result.
Okay.
He applies this to people. He argues that humans have a life structure. And here's the quote that really stood out to me. If you hang out with pigs, you become a pig. If you hang out with immortals, you become an immortal.
It's blunt, isn't it? It's the ultimate version of you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
But he takes it to a structural, almost atomic level. He argues that to change your life structure, to transcend time, you have to overcome inertia. You have to change your environment, your diet, and specifically your social circle.
If you stay in the same place with the same people, your atoms can't restructure. You're locked in.
You're just oxygen hanging out with iron, wondering why you keep turning into rust.
That is a perfect way to put it. And he says you need to increase your vibration frequency.
Yes.
Now, vibration is a word that gets thrown around a lot. It usually just means feeling good. Does Zhu Feng define it more clearly?
He actually does. He compares human energy to atomic energy. Higher frequency equals more power. But he gives a very practical example of what high frequency looks like in a person.
Which is?
The learning curve. He says a high-frequency person learns 10 skills from one lesson. They can see patterns, they're efficient.
They draw inferences.
Exactly. A low-frequency person, he says, struggles to follow simple instructions, like don't meddle in others' affairs.
That is surprisingly practical. It's not just about humming and meditating, it's about competence.
It is. He says high frequency allows for chaos management. effortless living. If you're low frequency, you're constantly bumping into walls, creating friction. And friction slows you down and ages you.
So we've talked about speed, biology, restructuring your atoms, but now we need to get to the second text. This is where the philosophy gets really radical regarding consciousness.
This is from Transcending Time and Space to Live in the Future. And this is where the definition of reality gets blurry. The text states that for consciousness, which he calls an antimatter structure, there is absolutely no difference between reality, dreams, virtual games, or memory.
Wait, no difference? Surely my brain knows the difference between eating a sandwich and dreaming about a sandwich.
To your stomach, yes. But to your consciousness, Feng argues it is all just perception and experience. If you feel fear in a nightmare, your heart races just like it would in real life. The experience is real, even if the context isn't.
Okay, I can see that. But if reality is just perception, then why are we so obsessed with the now? You hear that everywhere. Live in the now, be present.
And Feng completely flips that advice on its head. He critiques living in the moment. He asks a very pointed question. What is the now for most people?
Well, if we're honest, for a lot of people, the now is bills. It's the back pain. It's the traffic you're sitting in.
Exactly. The text argues that the now is often full of suffering and limitations. He even analyzes suicide through this lens.
How so?
He argues that people commit suicide because the now is too painful and they lack a vision of the future. They are trapped in a miserable present with no way out.
That is a heavy realization. If you're only focused on the present pain, that's despair. So what's the solution? If the now is a trap, do we live in the past?
No, he proposes living entirely in a visualized future. He calls it mental image thinking. He suggests you should imagine yourself living in these idealized places, the Life Zen Garden, the 1,000-Year World, or Elysium Isle.
So he is telling us just daydream, to dissociate.
It sounds like it, but he frames it as a survival mechanism, a tool for transcendence. By focusing your consciousness on a happy future, the current suffering becomes bearable. He compares it to holding a winning lottery ticket.
Explain that.
Well, if you're broke today, you're stressed.
Yeah.
But if you have a winning lottery ticket in your pocket that you can't cash until next week, you are still technically broke today. But are you stressed?
No. You're ecstatic.
Yeah.
You're planning what boat to buy.
Exactly, because your head is already in next week. You are essentially time traveling with your mind to escape the pain of the present. The physical reality hasn't changed, but your time has.
He's saying, why force your consciousness to experience the painful now when it can't tell the difference between reality and imagination anyway?
Why not feed it the nutrition of a beautiful future? It's a compelling argument for optimism, even if it's extreme.
But I want to circle back to something. We talked about transcending time, but the source also mentions things you can't do, the paradoxes.
Yes. For a text that is so, out there in some ways, it has some hard logical limits. He brings up the grandfather paradox, or in this case, the mother paradox.
Right.
The source poses the question, can you go back in time and kill your mother before you were born?
The classic sci-fi question. What does Feng say?
He says a flat no. He argues that it creates a logical paradox. If you killed her, you wouldn't be born to go back and kill her. Therefore, he concludes that some spacetimes cannot be transcended. There are hard limits.
That's interesting. For a text that talks about immortality and vanishing time, he still acknowledges rules.
He insists that time and space are not just hallucinations. He says they are real barriers. He uses the analogy of a river. You can't just stand on the bank and say the river is an illusion and expect to cross it.
You'll drown.
You'll drown. The river is real. You need a boat. You need to swim. You need tools.
And this brings us to the practical requirement of the text.
The dogmatic requirement, maybe? He emphasizes that you cannot transcend time just by reading these articles or understanding the concepts intellectually.
Right. Reading isn't enough. You can't just think your way there.
No. He insists one must physically enter the second home community. You have to follow the guide's map. He says it requires becoming light, love, Buddha, and immortal. It's a transformation of being, not just a shift in opinion.
Which brings us right back to that warning at the beginning. This is not a DIY project.
Not at all. It's a very specific path for a very specific community. But even from the outside looking in, there's a fascinating internal logic to it.
I agree.
The idea that we are trapped by our own definitions of time, that our environment and social circle are literally rewriting our atomic structure, that our consciousness is a tool we're underutilizing because we're too focused on the misery of the immediate moment.
It definitely makes you look at your watch a little differently. So let's recap this journey. We started with the physics of moving west to chase the sunset and stop time.
We looked at the biology of how stress and bad news shorten our telomeres.
We discussed the chemistry of people, how hanging out with low-frequency people might be keeping your vibration low, effectively, rusting your life structure.
And finally, that the solution offered here is to project your mind into a blissful future so powerfully that the present just becomes a waiting room.
Yeah.
That is the core message. It's about converting fixed numbers, what we call fate or biology, into variables. It claims that if you change your state of motion, your mindset, and your environment, you change the whole equation of your life.
It is a lot to take in.
Yeah.
But I think there is something really provocative in that idea of speed and time being relative to how we live.
There is one final thought from the source that I think really sticks with you. It's about efficiency and time. And I think this applies whether you believe in any of this or not.
That's thought.
Xufeng suggests that if you spend 10 years struggling to do what someone else does in 1 year,
Okay.
then that person has literally transcended 9 years of space-time compared to you.
Wow.
They have lived 9 years of life in the time it took you to just figure out the basics. They are moving at a different speed.
That hits hard. It really makes you ask, are you living in a slow timeline where everything is a struggle, or a fast timeline where things just flow?
And if you are in the slow lane, maybe it's time to look at who you're hanging out with and what information you're feeding your brain.
A question for all of us to mull over. Thank you to everyone for joining us on this deep dive into a very alternative view of reality.
Keep questioning the variables.
We'll see you in the future.